There is a certain kind of person who exhausts themselves before the day has even truly begun. They sit across from you at a dinner table, laughing at the right moments, passing the bread, saying all the right things. But somewhere behind their eyes, a second conversation is happening that no one else can hear. They already noticed that you hesitated before answering their question. They already felt the slight shift in your energy when someone else walked into the room. They already know something is slightly wrong, even though they cannot yet name what it is. Most people around them have no idea this is happening. They just think this person is calm, attentive, maybe even a little quiet. But inside, the machinery never stops running. People assume this kind of depth is an advantage. And in some ways, yes, it is. But the hidden side of that depth is a weight that very few people talk about. Because being someone who sees everything, feels everything, and absorbs everything does not feel like a superpower at 2 in the morning when your mind is still replaying a conversation from 3 days ago, searching for the exact moment something shifted. It feels like a prison with no visible walls. Today we are going to go deep into the psychology of people who are overwhelmingly aware of everything around them, why they became this way, and what it actually costs them, and more importantly, what they can do to finally stop carrying a weight that was never entirely theirs to carry. To understand why some people become this way, we first have to ask a very honest question. Where does this level of awareness actually come from? Psychology points to 2 distinct pathways. The first is biological. Some people are simply wired with a more sensitive nervous system from birth. Researchers have identified a trait called sensory processing sensitivity, and the people who carry it, often referred to as highly sensitive persons, process every stimulus, every sound, every shift in atmosphere, every emotional undercurrent with far greater depth than the average person. It is not something they decided to do. Their brain was built with a finer mesh. More gets caught, more gets processed, more gets felt. The world does not arrive to them at normal volume. It arrives louder, sharper, richer, and far more exhausting. But the second pathway is not about biology. It is about history. For a significant number of people, this kind of acute awareness was not something they were born with. It was something they were trained into. Neuroscience uses the term hypervigilance to describe this state, and its roots are often buried deep inside an unstable or emotionally unpredictable early environment. Think about what it means to grow up in a home where safety is not a constant, where love is conditional and moods shift without warning. A child in that environment quickly learns something profound. They learn that the world does not announce its dangers out loud. Danger comes quietly, comes in the way a door closes, in the specific silence that falls over a room before something bad happens, in the small flicker of an expression crossing a parent's face. That child learns to read all of it, not because someone taught them, but because reading it correctly meant being ready. Being ready meant surviving. Their brain, and specifically the amygdala, the structure responsible for detecting and responding to threat, becomes chronically active. It learns a rule that it never forgets. Stay alert, keep scanning, because the moment you stop paying attention is exactly the moment something will hurt you. By the time that child grows into an adult, the scanning has become automatic. It is no longer a tool they pick up consciously. It is the lens through which they experience everything. And when they eventually wonder why they cannot simply relax, why they cannot stop reading between the lines of every interaction, the answer is not that something is wrong with them. The answer is that their nervous system is still running the same protective software it built in order to keep them safe. The armor fit perfectly once. They just never had the chance to take it off. So what does that armor look like in everyday life? Let us walk through the signs. Sign 1. The mind that cannot leave a room. For most people, a social interaction ends when they walk out the door. They say goodbye, they get in their car, and they move on to the next thing. But for someone who is overly aware, the interaction is just entering its most intense phase. The real processing begins the moment the external event is over. They are lying in bed that night, and their mind is quietly reconstructing the entire evening. Not because they want to, but because something small snagged on a corner of their awareness and will not let go. The way that person smiled but their eyes did not move. The pause before someone answered a simple question. The moment the energy in the room dropped by 3 degrees when a specific topic was mentioned. This is closely tied to the activity of the default mode network, the brain system that activates during internal reflection and self-referential thought. For most people, this network calms down when there is nothing urgent to process. But in highly aware individuals, it tends to remain in a state of low-level constant activation, pulling experiences back into conscious review long after they have passed. The result is a mind that is almost never fully off the clock. They might be sitting in a garden on a beautiful afternoon, but a fragment of Tuesday's meeting is running quietly in the background. They are technically at rest. Their mind, however, is still filing reports. Sign 2. Watching yourself from a distance. There is a psychological concept called metacognition, the ability to observe and think about your own mental processes. It is a function of the prefrontal cortex, and it is one of the things that separates more reflective thinkers from less reflective ones. But in overly aware people, metacognition does not function like a useful tool they apply when needed. It functions like a security camera that is always recording. They do not simply experience their emotions. They witness them, and then immediately evaluate whether those emotions are appropriate, logical, justified, or proportionate. The pattern tends to follow a predictable sequence. Something happens, a feeling arises, and before that feeling has even fully formed, the observation layer activates. Why am I feeling this? Is this a reasonable response? What does it say about me that this is how I reacted? Happiness gets intercepted. They are genuinely enjoying something, and then a quiet internal voice steps in to audit the experience. Are you sure this is real? Is this the kind of happiness that lasts or the kind that disappears the moment you look directly at it? Grief gets analyzed. Anger gets cross-examined. Even love, when it arrives, gets placed under careful inspection before it is allowed to simply be felt. The cruel irony is that all of this self-monitoring was originally an attempt to understand themselves better. But in its excess, it creates the opposite effect. They become spectators of their own lives, present enough to observe everything, too busy observing to fully inhabit any of it. Sign 3. The loss of easy trust. There is something quietly painful about becoming very good at reading people. It sounds like it should be an advantage, and in certain situations it is. But it comes at a cost that most people do not talk about. When you have spent years noticing the gap between what people say and what they actually mean, you begin to lose the ability to simply take things at face value. A genuine compliment reaches you, and before you can feel the warmth of it, your mind is already asking what might be underneath it. An apology is offered, and you find yourself measuring not just the words but the quality of the silence before them. Psychology describes this capacity for reading hidden intentions as theory of mind, and it is a genuinely sophisticated cognitive ability. But when it operates without a filter, without the ability to sometimes simply accept a moment as it appears, it starts to quietly erode something important. It erodes the ability to feel safe in closeness. They are not cynical people. They are not cold people. In fact, they often care more deeply than almost anyone around them. But they have seen enough of the distance between a person's surface and their interior that they find it very difficult to simply rest in a relationship without part of their mind quietly standing guard. This creates a particular kind of loneliness. Not the loneliness of someone who has been left, but the loneliness of someone who is surrounded by people, yet still feels slightly outside the ease and lightness that others seem to experience so effortlessly. The world of connection feels like a language they speak fluently but think about too carefully to ever sound truly native in. Sign 4. Carrying other people's emotional weather. When awareness is turned outward with this level of sensitivity, something else begins to happen that goes beyond observation. They start to absorb. They walk into a space and immediately the emotional atmosphere registers. Not as data, as sensation. The tension between two colleagues who have not yet resolved an argument from yesterday. The grief that someone is holding professionally together on the outside but leaking from every micro-expression. The particular kind of loneliness that has settled around someone at a party who keeps refilling their drink. Neuroscience points to the role of mirror neurons in this experience. These neural systems activate in response to observing another person's emotional state, creating a kind of internal echo of what the other person is experiencing. In most people, this system operates at a moderate level. It allows for empathy and connection. But in someone with heightened awareness, the signal amplification can be extreme. Another person's anxiety does not just register as something they notice. It begins to resonate inside them as their own. This makes them extraordinarily sensitive companions. People feel genuinely understood in their presence. Sometimes more understood than they have ever felt with anyone else. There is a real gift in that. But what rarely gets acknowledged is that this gift is being funded entirely by the person offering it. Every room they walk into, every conversation they absorb, every emotional undercurrent they process on behalf of the people around them draws from a reserve that does not refill itself automatically. By evening, they are often carrying a weight assembled entirely from other people's experiences. And the people whose weight they have been carrying have long since moved on with their evening, feeling inexplicably lighter. Sign 5. When the mind tries to outrun the pain. All of that incoming data, the reading, the scanning, the absorbing, the watching of self, eventually accumulates into something the system cannot indefinitely sustain. And when it reaches a certain pressure, the mind reaches for the only tool it trusts completely: control through anticipation. If I can see the ending coming, the logic goes, then the ending cannot truly devastate me. If I can map every possible outcome of this situation, I will not be caught off guard. If I run the worst-case scenario enough times in advance, then when it arrives, I will already be prepared for it. The result is a state that psychology sometimes describes as anticipatory anxiety, living not inside what is actually happening, but inside every possible version of what might happen. The mind runs simulations. It constructs worst-case futures in precise detail. It rehearses responses to disasters that have not occurred and may never occur. And this strategy works after a fashion. It does soften certain shocks, but it extracts a staggering price. Because in order to be perpetually ready for the worst version of the future, you have to be perpetually absent from the actual present. The life that is genuinely happening, with all its texture and warmth and ordinary beauty, keeps moving forward while the mind is stationed 3 steps ahead of it, scanning the horizon for threats. This is also closely tied to interoception, the brain's process of reading the body's internal signals, governed by the insular cortex. In highly aware people, physical sensations are often also amplified and misread. A racing heart from a strong cup of coffee becomes evidence that something is about to go wrong. A tightness in the chest becomes proof that the worry is justified. The body becomes another source of alarm data in a system that is already receiving far more than it can comfortably process. The brutal outcome of all of this is not that they suffer dramatic collapses. It is quieter and more persistent than that. They move through life in a state of low-grade exhaustion that is very hard to explain to someone who has never experienced it, because from the outside, they often appear to have everything together. They appear calm, capable, present. What no one sees is the marathon their mind has been silently running every single day just to maintain that appearance. So what does the path forward actually look like for someone who lives this way? The answer is not to become less perceptive. You cannot dismantle the instrument. And even if you could, something profound would be lost. The depth with which they understand human experience, the tenderness with which they can hold another person's pain, the precision with which they can see what is real beneath what is performed, all of that is genuinely valuable. The world needs people who see it this clearly. What has to change is not the seeing. It is the obligation. In therapeutic work, this usually involves a gradual but fundamental shift in how they relate to their own awareness. Learning to observe without the requirement to respond. Learning to feel without the requirement to explain. Learning to notice without the requirement to solve. There are 3 shifts that tend to make the most meaningful difference. The first is releasing the assumption that everything perceived is a problem assigned to them. They notice tension in a room. That noticing is information. But information is not automatically a task. They see the difficulty beneath someone's cheerful exterior. That seeing is empathy. But empathy is not automatically a contract to fix what they have seen. They begin to understand that witnessing something does not obligate them to carry it. The second shift is learning to befriend uncertainty rather than defeat it. The exhausting project of running every possible simulation in advance is rooted in a belief that certainty is available if they just think hard enough. But it is not. The future remains genuinely open, regardless of how many scenarios they rehearse. When they begin to practice sitting in that openness without immediately trying to resolve it, the mental noise begins slowly to quiet. Not because the uncertainty disappears, but because they stop waging a war against something that was never possible to win. The third shift is perhaps the most important. It is learning to draw a line between depth and dissolution. There is a version of awareness that illuminates, that sees clearly and uses that clarity with intention and discernment. And there is a version that swallows the person whole, leaving them submerged beneath a world of signals and meanings and absorbed emotions that are not entirely their own. The goal is not numbness. The goal is the kind of grounded presence that allows them to stand inside their awareness rather than being stood over by it. When they begin to practice these shifts, something quietly remarkable begins to happen. The awareness does not diminish, but it changes texture. It becomes less like a floodlight scanning everything for danger and more like a steady lamp that illuminates what is genuinely in front of them. They still read the room, but they can also finally simply be in it. They still feel deeply, but they can let some of what they feel move through and past them rather than setting up permanent residence inside their chest. They discover that the same sensitivity that made certain parts of life so heavy is also what makes the beautiful parts of life so extraordinarily vivid. A piece of music that makes them stop completely in the middle of a kitchen. The quality of afternoon light through a window that genuinely moves them. The way a small moment of honesty between two people can feel, to them, like something sacred. These are not small things. These are, in fact, the things that most people rush past without truly feeling. And the overly aware person, when they finally stop fighting their own nature, realizes that they have never actually been missing anything. They have been experiencing everything. They simply needed to learn how to hold it without being held down by it. The mind that cannot stop noticing is not a broken mind. It is a mind that cares extraordinarily deeply about the world it has been placed inside. And that kind of caring, when it is no longer turned exclusively outward as a defense mechanism but also turned inward as an act of compassion toward oneself, becomes something genuinely rare. It becomes wisdom that has survived its own weight. If something in this resonated with you, if you recognized yourself somewhere in what we explored today, leave a comment and tell me which sign felt the most familiar. You are not alone in this, and the depth you carry is not something to be corrected. It is something to be understood. If this video gave you something to think about, or gave you a little more language for something you have been carrying quietly for a long time, please like it and share it with someone who might need to hear it too. Sometimes the most important thing we can offer another person is simply the feeling of being accurately seen. Thank you for spending this time here. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next one.